Today's lecture, titled Arrays, Objects, and Cookies, is going to be a little bit light on the slides themselves. What I want to spend a lot of today doing is, one, breaking out into your teams, and then I'll be going from team to team to try to answer any major questions that you have that are personal to your project. And then after we do that, I want to spend a lot of time, at least an hour to 2 hours, just going through live code demos. So I've got a few things in mind that I want to go over, but if there are certain common themes that I feel like maybe there's some missing concepts in code that we all might need to go through, then I'll definitely go through those in the second half of the lecture. So start thinking about what you might want to bring up. I think those breakout times, the team breakouts, which will probably be in 30, 45 minutes. Like I said, I don't have too many slides, will be probably very important, right, for your teams to get the information that you all need to have a great final project. And then after we do all that, I'll spend a little bit of time just talking about the final project and what the expectations are. Okay, first off, just a little thing. We went through this lecture or two ago, but I want to emphasize with JavaScript, I think debugging is a very important concept. The best way to debug is to use DevTools. On Chrome, it's basically just right-clicking your page and then hitting inspect, and then these DevTools will come up. Now, if you're in the Elements page and you highlight over certain lines of code, what shows up here is basically your entire code base. Then it will show you what that code corresponds to. So for instance, there was a team that I spoke with a week or two ago that had this big white space that was basically taking up space and didn't really make any sense to have on the page. And so sometimes figuring out where that's coming from can be difficult. The dev tools can very quickly help you understand where that is just by simply highlighting over the code. And then as you highlight over each line, you'll see on the page what that code corresponds to. So that can be a very handy way to debug. Also on the console, that's sort of where if you use that term console log, and I'll do this in some of our examples, then you can print out answers. I did that last week as well when we were talking about the glucose diabetes algorithm. And that can help you understand, even if you haven't finished your code, are you on the right track, right? If I'm trying to put the result that is inputted into a field into a variable in the JavaScript, one great way to do that is through console log, and then that will print out in the console. Sources, that's another tab, and we'll go through this a little bit later, but that can help you add breakpoints to your code where let's say that you want your JavaScript to execute, but only go halfway, and then you want to really understand what's going on. The sources can help you do that. So these can be a very powerful tool on your browser to help debug any issues that you're having in JavaScript. So then just going back through this, elements will help you identify which code is associated with an on-screen element. So it can sort of translate the code itself to what you see on the screen. You can also edit text if you want to just change live code, right? That's an example I showed you all, I believe 2 lectures ago when I changed certain elements of a web page. Console, this term is really the most important takeaway from the console section is you can use console log to print out some variable that you're working with just to make sure that it looks the way that you want it to look. Is it actually acquiring the value of a field or whatever you're trying to get it to do? And then another key aspect of the console is it helps you view errors. So in this case, I just have an image of an error where I was trying to implement, it looks like a Facebook, maybe a Facebook comment plugin, and it was saying uncaught reference error, FB is not defined, right? So that shows me that there's something wrong. And this helps give me a clue as to why maybe the element that I intended to put in is not showing up. So what I would do as a next step is basically just copy that error, probably from reference error to defined, and then Google it and then see, okay, when other people have gotten this error, what do they do? And then here's an example of how breakpoints can be used. So if I'm at sources and I bring up my scripts.js, which for most of you all, that's your JavaScript file. If you named it something else, you would just look for that other file. And you can see it's within this sort of file directory format. So it's very, classic way to try to find files within a folder. And it looks similar to what you see in Visual Studio Code, right? But this is within the browser. This is when you click that inspect element. When you click that file, in this case scripts.js, you can actually click on the left margin a given line. And in this case, when I clicked line number 10, it actually sets a breakpoint. So next time when I reload the page and I try to run that script, it's going to stop here. And then I can just sort of go step by step, one line by one line, and see either A, where the code might be throwing an error, or B, just see what's going on. And in this case, when I go line by line, you can see that it went all the way to line 23. So this is basically just clicking the next line arrow. And again, we'll go through this in that live coding. It just goes line by line, and then it'll say what happened. So like here, remember when I was trying to get the value of the input of glucose using the glucose field, it tells me what that value was that was inputted. If it's doing something wrong, then instead of 100, it might, list an error or something that was not the intention. So here I can see, oh, you know what? This is saying HbA1c equals 200. That's not what I inputted. So there must be something wrong there. Or that is what I inputted. So I know it's good at least up to this point, so I can keep going line by line. So very powerful way to try to problem solve why your JavaScript is working or is not working properly. Other browsers, with Firefox, it really works the same way. With Safari, what you do have to do is you have to go into Preferences and then Advanced and then Show Develop menu. And so then you just click that, and then it becomes a very similar process to trying to get that developer tool open. I don't want to hype one brand over another, but a lot of my examples are in Chrome simply because that's the most established, easiest tool to use. But the other browsers, the other main ones, offer good tools to that as well. I would not recommend Internet Explorer. So if you typically use that as your primary, I would just suggest for coding troubleshooting, trying to use Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. Okay, before I move on to arrays and objects, any questions about debugging? Again, I'll show you some live examples as we're coding later on in the lecture, but this is just sort of your reference of some of the tools that you can use to debug your JavaScript. I mean, the hardest thing about JavaScript is there's always something, right? You forgot a semicolon, or you were referencing IDs instead of classes. There's always something that'll throw you off. It's all about having a good debugging process to try to figure out what that thing is that's screwing it up, and then being able to solve that. Nobody writes perfect code. Nobody that I know writes perfect code in their first draft. There's always bugs. So debugging is one of the most important skills that you can have as a developer. All right, then moving on to arrays and objects. So just a few definitions first. So an array is basically a way to store multiple values into a single variable. So in this case, I'm using the straight bracket. Another word for this, so array is one word, a list is another way to do it. So if I put something in the straight brackets and I separate it by commas, then I can actually put 4 strings within one variable. So rather than having to say, cardiac equals cardiac, neuro equals neuro, and just creating 4 different variables, I could maybe just say categories is my variable name, and it equals to straight bracket, cardiac, neuro, muscular, and skeletal. And then if I want to call each one, I might say, hey, give me the first element of the categories variable, and then it'll throw back cardiac. If I want to say, give me the third, it'll throw back muscular. And we'll go through an example of how you could turn an array into a table that shows up on the screen. And so arrays are essentially going to be our substitute for a database, right? Because I mentioned we don't have enough time to go over the creation of actual SQL databases, but we can use these JavaScript arrays as sort of a substitute, and we can just store the data that we want to put in within our code and then use that to populate what shows up on the screen. An object. Now, an object is, I would say, a little bit of a smarter way to store data than an array. So within an array, in this case, how do we know that the first element corresponds to cardiac, third is muscular? It's not very smart, right? In our case, maybe we just happen to know because we wrote the code, but we would rather use something like a key value pair. And in this case, if I put my data within a curly bracket, I can start to set definitions, sort of like a dictionary, right? So if an array is sort of a dumb, unordered list, an object is more of a smart dictionary. So here what I'm saying is the definition of name is Will, and the definition of email is wrosh@kgi.edu. So in this case, if let's say I set my object equal to Will's info, then I can call the name key within Will's info and it will return Will. Or I could recall the email key within Will's info and it will return wrosh@kgi.edu. Now, the best, most database-like usage of objects and arrays is to actually combine a bunch of objects into an array. So in this case, I have a bunch of these curly bracket dictionaries within a square bracket list. So you could see how this might turn into a table. So I've got row number 1 might be name Will, email wrosh@kgi.edu. Row number 2 might be dan@kgi.edu. Row number 3 might be amy@kgi.edu, and so on and so forth. So this can kind of approximate an Excel spreadsheet, right? Where each key within an object is a column, and then each object within an array is a row. And that's essentially how a lot of databases are formatted. So in this case, by creating these array of objects, we're creating a database within our code. Any questions about that? It's sort of a heavy concept. If you are completely confused, please let me know. Either raise your hand or send something in the chat, maybe a question. If you feel like you've almost got it, but not quite, don't worry. We'll go over an example in the lecture that should hopefully help harden that knowledge within you. So are we all good? Can we move on, or anyone have any questions? Okay, let's move on then. All right, so what I have here is essentially a catch-all slide that really lists a lot of the JavaScript array methods. I also have them linked here, so I'll upload these slides after the lecture. But if you look at this flow chart, I'm not going to go through each and individual one of them, but you can say, what do you want to do? And then just sort of answer these questions. And then it will tell you the different functions to use. So you'll see me in the lecture go through a few functions. You might be like, what the heck is that? Where did he even get that function from? Honestly, a lot of it is just Googling and or repetition. And then eventually you just sort of know which functions to use. There's not really any secret sauce. Just finding good references. W3 schools, as usual, I like to go back to that just because it's very much written for someone who's beginning at coding, but it also is something that's useful to people who've been coding for years. So that's a great way to just basically understand what the different JavaScript functions are. All right, let's get into the arrays demo. So I will cancel out of my slides and then we'll go into the code. So back to my code, I'm going to right click the tab and then copy path so that we can see what my code looks like. And here we are. Okay. If we show the menu, we see that we've got, we actually don't have anything for tables. So why don't we create another element for tables? So I'm just going to copy the chat element and then rename it tables. And then the href will go to tables.html, which does not exist yet. So what I'll do is create a new file and then save it. Maybe I have to type something first. Why isn't it saving? Let's just exit out of here. I feel like there's something wrong with, let's try it again. So a new file, and then we'll just copy the head as well as the nav bar. Let's copy the whole thing, paste it in, and then we'll rename the title to ALS414 table, and then just delete all the meat within here. And then, for some reason, my save is not working. Okay, I'm going to quit and then just reload. Now apparently Visual Studio Code is gone. Let's see. Okay. All right, now let's try. Okay, I guess I just had to restart Visual Studio Code. I don't know what happened there, but now it looks good. All right, so now I have my tables. Looks like, okay, looks good. So I'll reload. Now you can see tables exist, and when I click it, it says file doesn't exist because basically this is tables.html and I had a link to table. So I'll just put an S there, reload. All right, now I can get into tables, right? So what I'll do now is I'll just create a very basic table. Table. Now, within a table, I'm going to make some rows, so tr, and then when it's within the rows, I'm going to make first a th for a header, and we'll call the first one name, second one, how about phone, and then third one, how about position. Okay, and then we'll create maybe another one where we actually have data. And instead of th, this will be td, which is just sort of a data cell. So th is like a header cell, td is a data cell. And then we'll just say Will, Rosh, phone number, and then position, we'll say teacher. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Okay, so it's a table. It's ugly, but it is a table. Now, if we want to format it, I could just go into my CSS and then say that I want my th headers maybe to have a border. So 1px solid black. And then how about a background color of yellow. Okay. And then my TDs, that's my data cells, we'll do the same thing. I want it to have a border, 1px solid black, and then yellow. And then we'll give it the let's give it a height and width. So height, let's just say 20 pixels, and then width about 150 pixels. Okay, so now I reload, and there, I've got something that looks more like a table. Okay, but in this case, I have hard coded my information. Now we want to use data tables. So let's go into scripts. And let's create an array. So filling in data table rows. So our first step is to create our, let's call it information. So this will be a variable that's going to equal a list. So that's the straight brackets of dictionaries. Okay. So our first dictionary, we need a name. And let's say Jane Doe. We got to make sure we put it in quotes. That's very important because it's a string. And then our next key, all keys need to be in quotes as well, would be the phone number. And then we'll give her 555-444-3333. So that's her phone number. And that's a dictionary. Oh, actually, we'll need position too. So position, and then how about we say that she is a patient. Okay, so that's one dictionary that will fill in my table. We have a name, a phone, and a position. Let's go ahead and create another dictionary within our array. And I like to just sort of indent it. You don't have to, but it just kind of looks nice if you indent it this way. Oops. Okay. So how about John Doe? And we'll give John Doe a slightly different phone number. I'll do 667-7474. Position, how about provider? Make sure you do a comma because each element in an array needs to be separated by a comma. Copy, enter. Let's do another one. How about Jose Doe? 223, 3232. Position, how about payer? Let's do one more about Wando. Okay, and then how about 989-1212. Okay. Last element does not need a comma, but now we have our data, and this is sort of, in our case, the substitute for a database. Okay. So now that we've created this information, we have to figure out how are we going to put it into our data table. So with JavaScript, anytime you want to do something to a table, you have to give it an ID, or really any element. So in this case, my ID, we'll just call it the data table. Okay. So now we can reference data table within our JavaScript. Okay. So I want to show you just sort of, rather than how I magically get the information, I'll show you how I would go about doing this. So I would just Google, I would say, using Jquery to add rows to table. Okay. So in this case, you could choose between Geeks for Geeks, which is just sort of a instructive website or Stack Overflow. It's really just a matter of taste. I can see that I visited this before, so maybe this is something that I like. And you can see that they say, blah, blah, blah. You can do this one way, but you end up with something weird. Therefore, I would recommend this approach instead. So in this case, what they're doing is they're calling the table. Hashtag means it's the ID. And then they're basically saying after the last row, add code. So this is something we can work with. Okay, so I just copied that answer. And now I know that I need to change the ID to whatever I named my table. In this case, data table. Okay. And then after the last row, we're going to add basically what's in information. But before we do that, let's try it out, right? So let's just try to add one thing. Essentially what we're doing is we're adding the HTML of here through JavaScript. So we're going to say tr, and then within that, we know we have 3 data cells or columns. So td, and then we'll just say, Steve Doe. Close out the td, and then we'll just do 3 more of those. But then maybe just change the next one to a number, 777, 7676, and then the last data cell to the position, let's say nurse, right? So let's see if that works. All right, so now we know that we figured out a way to use JavaScript to add rows to a table. Now what we need to do is figure out how to add all of these rows that we named in the information array into the table. So this gets just a little bit more complicated. What we're going to do is use something called each. So JavaScript iterate through array using each. Okay, so I misspelled that, but they fixed it. So this person said, can you use a for loop to traverse objects within an array, right? And then there's lots of answers, and they kind of give the different ways to do it. I kind of like this one just because it's sort of spread out and easy to see. So you can see that they have an array, and then they say for each within that array, do something. So let's copy that. Okay, so we're going to get rid of this array because that's just their fake array. Instead, we want to use information. So within our information array, for each of those, do a function. And you can see that within here, I actually have 2 inputs to this function. There's item and index. Let's see what happens. So because in this example, they're printing out item and index. All right, so back to my project. I'm going to right click, inspect, so that I can see what prints out into my console. Okay, so what it did is it printed out each dictionary within the array, and then it printed out a number. Okay, so in that case, the number was the index, and then the dictionary was item. So I know that I'm going to be working with items. So now instead of doing console log item, what I want to do is I want to see if I can call just the, how about the phone number within here? So I'm going to go back to trusty Google again, how to get value of JavaScript, let's say object, not dictionary. Okay. So getting values of an object. In this case, they use this. So value equals data and then key within the straight brackets. So let's take that, put that into my for each iteration. And now, so we're going to do item instead of data, because that's just the variable that I'm using within my function. And then instead of key, we're going to actually say phone. So let's reload. And now you can see it printed out the phones. So now I not only have a way to iterate through my information array, but I also have figured out a way to call a certain attribute, in this case, phone, within my JavaScript objects. So that sort of ties it all together. Any questions? This is probably a really good place to pause and let things settle, answer any questions that you all might have. All right, then let's keep moving. So now I'm going to actually insert my function that I created earlier to insert rows onto my table. And instead of saying Steve Doe, I'm going to use this item, right? In this case, it's phone. So let's replace this one first, the thing that we know we want to be our phone number. What we have to do is just use sort of this JavaScript string combination method, which is close out each string and then add the variable in between. And then we can do the same with here. So I'm going to delete, close it out, and then add the variable, and then create the string again. Now call it name. And then let's just do it one more time with this, and then change that to position. Okay, let's see if this works. Fingers crossed, reload, and you can see now that I've added rows to my table that correspond to my data table. Okay, so this is essentially, it's very similar to how backend code works. So here we're kind of faking backend code so that I can teach you the very basics of it. But the essence of backend code is how can I use a data structure? In this case, it's this very simple array of objects that we've created to make things happen on my HTML screen. Okay, so this is really a big, very powerful concept once you get used to it. Just for completeness, I'm going to get rid of this hard-coded row. So now all we have hard-coded is this table with the headers. And I reload, and now we can see all the other rows are coming from my JavaScript. So now just to emphasize, I'm going to paste what I just deleted. And then I'm just going to create another dictionary in my array, comma, so I add another. And I'm just going to move the elements into here. So now, once I do this, none of my data is going to be hard-coded. It's all going to be coming from my array of objects within JavaScript. Cool. So there I am. Pretty powerful concept. Any questions? Yes, Kevin.
So if we wanted to make a table for our website similar to yours, we would put the information on the JavaScript, the scripts.js.
Yeah, that would be the most impressive way to do it, right? I mean, you could always just decide to hard code the table. I won't dock you for it, but I do want to see that you've done a good amount of cool JavaScript features. And so in that sense, doing so would impress me, right? So it just sort of make the project that much stronger if you used a data table to populate all of your tables. Okay, but not mandatory. You know, if tables are not sort of the core element of what you're trying to do, don't worry about it. And some tables are just, they're not really things that need to be supplied by a database. They're things that are perfectly fine to be hard coded, like sort of our contact information, things like that. But if we're talking about like individual users or something that really seems like it should come from a database, then I would recommend using this method to populate your tables. It just shows a stronger understanding of JavaScript, as well as being able to use this pseudo backend function to populate your web page. All right. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, so next steps for arrays is just really creating an array database for inputs. Try to do some sort of database. I'd love to see this used at least once in your projects, and manipulate that array in ways that are useful for your users, such as filtering, additions, combinations, edits. Let me just show you one other way that we can manipulate it. So if we created, I'm going to do my multiple cursors again. So I'm highlighting position and then Command or Control D. Now I've got 5 cursors, and I'm just going to move all the way to the end using Command or Control right arrow, go back a few, and now I'm going to create something called rank. Okay, and then colon, and then we'll just give them numbers. Okay. Sometimes when you use the multiple cursors, things get a little screwed up. So on this last row, I just have to, I stole somehow the closing quote from teacher and put it there. So now everything looks fine. Visual Studio Code's color scheme helped me see the error, right? This rank was red, and the 3 was green. And then when I fixed it, now we have a consistent color scheme, okay? And I'm just gonna give these all sort of a random number rank. Okay. And then how about 6? And then let's just create another column for the rank. All right, that looks good. I'm going to also have to create another column in my headers for rank. Let's go back to my tab. Okay, now I can see their ranking. Let's see if I can order them by rank. One way to do that would be before I iterate through my information array of objects, I'm going to sort it. So let's Google again. How to sort array of objects in JavaScript by string property value. That looks good. Okay. Okay, I like this. So this person gave us sort of a long way to do it, an inline way that's still a little bit long, and then just the super simple way. Let's go with the super simple way. So I'm going to copy this in and then see if I can make this fit my code. So in their case, they used objects. It looks like that's their array. So let's change objects to information. And now they have this last nom was the attribute that they're trying to sort by. Let's just change that to rank. Let's see if that works. Voila, now it's sorted. So I don't know if that's useful to anyone, but if you want to kind of rank the data that shows up, this is a good way to do that. Mary, you have a question.
Yeah, what's a good rule of thumb in terms of the project not of having well executed, more elaborate functions? Like, what's a good number to aim for?
Sure. Why don't I just, because I'm getting some of these questions, let's skip ahead to the last slides. Okay. Yeah, this is probably good slides I have at the beginning. So prototype code, what I'm looking for is content. So what a user, so this is sort of, we're talking about from the user perspective. So if a user were to go onto the website, do they really understand the purpose of the prototype without excessive guidance, right? So is the site essentially self-explanatory? And that's whoever's working on the HTML should really try to fine tune And then of course your user testing is very helpful for that as well. There was a question before everyone got on about user testing. How do we want to show that in the final presentation? I will be looking for your final project grades. I'll be looking at your user testing document just to make sure that you did that sufficiently. But it would be nice if during your presentations you said something like, hey, we did a bunch of user testing and we found out that if we moved the nav bar to the left side instead of the right side, it was more straightforward. That's obviously a silly example, but you could imagine variations on that theme of what we learned that they did not understand that this was an application for tracking periods. And so we decided to have a very clear explanation on the homepage to make that clear, right? Design. So are you following the design principles that we went over, as well as just does it look nice? And you know, that's subjective, right? I'm not here to judge, you know, did you use the right color scheme or anything like that. But what I want to see is that you put work into the CSS aspect of the web page, and that you use that to really have a page with colors and shapes, borders, things like that. Inputs and outputs. So does the prototype take inputs from the user of some sort and then transform them into outputs that satisfy the core user story? That's really the most important part from a sort of a JavaScript perspective. And then also, are you using any data visualizations? That would obviously be nice. So charts, images, you know, with the example of images, you could imagine maybe like a red light, green light, yellow light, depending on a diagnosis, something like that, versus a data table, but both of those would be acceptable. And then commenting, I want to really see that you are explaining what you're doing, sort of the showing your work part of code. And I'll go through that as we're doing the coding part of the lecture, which we're in right now. I'll show you how to properly comment your code. For the presentation, we're really looking for 15 to 20 minutes plus Q&A. So did the team describe the user story in detail and explain how their prototype satisfies the user's needs? So this is the part that, as you can probably tell by now, I'm hammering in of I really want to see that you understand how to build a prototype off of actual user needs. Of course, this is about learning how to code, but it's also about understanding how to build something useful. And if you don't understand that, then I don't care what your skills are, you're just going to build useless things. So I really want to make sure that you are showing how your prototype addresses the user story. Roles, so did you explain what you did and why? So really, who is in charge of what? Methodology, did you follow the agile methodology? And then did you explain how you used user testing to improve your prototype? So those are the general guidelines. And then from there on out, it's really just, are you using the principles that we learned in class and applying that to your project? So if you have a good balance of solid HTML code, you use CSS to make that code or to make the content flow in a web page sort of format, and it's pleasing in some way to the user. And then you use JavaScript to do the input output stuff and data visualization. If you hit all of those, then you'll do well, you'll get an A. I think oftentimes where I see projects fall short is, you know, maybe they did like no JavaScript or just like the simplest thing, like you click a button and something shows up. You know, I'd like you to use these skills in a coherent way that makes the prototype useful in some way. Does that answer your question?
Ish.
Okay. How can
I'll
I
ask her.
further? Okay, great. Okay, so going back to the code, let's comment this code. Okay, so I'm saying filling in the data table rows, but actually this line, what we're really doing, let's make a header comment that is along the lines of let's see, JavaScript database to tables.html table, right? So we know what we're doing here. And then let's comment here, creating array of objects. Here we are sorting array by rank order. And then here we are filling in the data table rows. Okay, just for kicks, let's see what happens if we reverse these. So instead of A minus B, it's B minus A. Going back to the code, voila. Now it's 6, 5, 3, 2, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Cool. So lots of things we could do with that, right? We could sort by name. We could sort by rank. We could, maybe create some JavaScript that changes the value of rank, right? Maybe a like button or a plus or a minus button, and then use that to rank. So all of those are possibilities. Back to the slides. Okay, next up, cookies. So we went sort of a brief overview of what cookies are, but essentially it's a small piece of data that ends up being stored in a user's browser on behalf of a website. So if you look in your settings of any browser and then you figure somewhere, usually it's in privacy and security, you look for the cookies, then you can actually see that dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of sites that you visited in the past have their own cookies stored within your browser. Sometimes you might have heard the term, if your browser is going slow, try clearing the cookies. That's because if you've never ever cleared the cookies, you could have literally thousands of cookies stored in your single browser. This is how targeted ads work. It also can record browsing activities such as whether or not you're logged in, so you don't have to log in every time you revisit a page. What you've recently viewed, maybe they're going to do something with that. Maybe they know you're a physician, and so they show you the physician page first and foremost. And maybe they remember some of your form entries as well. So we're going to learn how to store cookies in the browser for our websites. All right, now this all starts with something that is called JS cookies. So this is the link. I've already got it opened up in a tab. So the way that we get this, there's lots of ways that you can implement this. This is sort of like a package that you would put onto your website. Lots of ways to implement this. I prefer in our example, and I think this is perfectly legitimate for the way that you guys are doing this, to use CDN. So CDN is essentially, stands for Content Delivery Network. And it's a way to get the latest and greatest of this JS cookies package code without having to actually download it to your computer. So I'm just going to click this link. I want this index.js. Oop, that's actually not what I want. I want this one, this js.cookie.min.js, which is just sort of a minified, which is another word for ugly and condensed version of the JavaScript code. I'm going to copy that link. Then I'm going to just refer to it up on my index page. So very similar to how I imported Bootstrap. Script src equals within quotes. I'm going to paste my link. Then I'm going to close out the script element. And then I've got JS cookie imported. You can see that it looks actually very similar to how I imported Bootstrap. You can also see with Bootstrap that came from a CDN as well. So this is the easiest, simplest way to import some of these packages onto your computer. The only downside is that you're dependent on that web page to still always be alive. It's not the recommended method if you've got a site that's dependent on a lot of users, they're dependent on your website. they're visiting all the time. You want your site to move as quickly as possible, and you don't want to be beholden to what's here. If that's your case, which is not really any of your cases for this prototype, then you would go to this JS cookie and essentially maybe you would just copy this code and put it into your own file. Or you would just download it and through the instructions that they provide up here, right? But I find it easiest to just link with a CDN for the purposes of this lecture. After we do that, we need to basically use the functions, okay? So let's see if that works. I'm going to, within my scripts, cookies. And then I'm going to just use their example. So from cookies, cookie set. And then if I go down, there's also cookies get. So if I set it, I'm setting the cookie. And if I'm getting it, I'm getting the name of the cookie. So let's just set user equals Will. And then I want to get that user cookie, and I actually want to print it. Well, let's not do that. Let's do something fancier. That's too lazy. So I'm going to say var username equals cookies get user. And then I'm going to create something at the top of my index. Let's just go back, see what it looks like. If we go home, how about we have below this some text that just says nothing. But we're going to give it an ID that says welcome text. Okay. So now within my scripts, I can say welcome text. Text is going to be username. Okay. Actually, don't think we need this import. So all you have to do is do the cookies set and then the cookies get. Okay, now there's an unfortunate aspect of the cookies, which is that you can't actually test it on your local. So we're going to have to push our code just to see if it works. So we're going to add that. I'm going to add our new tables. Looks like I have the table formatting and then my new JavaScript. Commit, we're going to say adding data tables and cookies, just so that we know what's going on. And then I'm going to push. Okay. So while we're waiting for the code to take effect, let's just go through this JavaScript text. So we'll say jQuery change text within element. Replace only text inside a div using jQuery. This looks a little complicated. So let's see. Okay, how about that? So here you can see, okay, what you do is just basically call the element and then text and then write whatever you want that text to be, and then it should change it. Just for kicks, since we know cookies isn't working, let's just say welcome Will. So not relying on the cookies. Oops. There, it says welcome Will. So we figured out a way to insert text into this, where is it? This welcome text, sort of an empty P, right? If we were to not have that line of code, then there'd be nothing there. Okay. So really, I kind of messed this up because I didn't want it to say username. I wanted to say welcome. So I'm going to use again that sort of string combination method to say welcome as my string and then just add the username to that. That's really what I wanted to do. But let's just see if the cookie worked. Okay, we can see adding data tables and cookies was inserted into my code base. When I bring up the page and it says Will. So it doesn't say welcome Will because remember that's not what I pushed to the code, but I can see now that my cookie actually worked. Now we can get, now that we know that the cookies worked, we can get a little bit more complex. Why don't we use a object that we call profile, okay? And what we're gonna actually have to do is, let's see, we're going to have an on-click function, okay? So within our index, we will have something called we'll have a div. Let's make it take up the whole screen. So call XS12, remember from yesterday's lecture. And then we're gonna have some inputs. So how about we just do a label, call it name. Well, first let's have a title. H2, and then we'll say, please enter your information, name, and then input type is going to be a text. Oops. Okay. And then we'll give this an ID. We'll just call it name input so that we can get it later in our JavaScript. And then how about phone? And how about email? Name input, phone input, email input. Then we're gonna have another input. The type is going to be submit. Type is submit. And then ID will be submit input. Let's see what that looks like. This is not my local. This is GitHub. So let's go back to my local. Okay, so pay no mind to the fact that this is ugly. We can fix that later. Let's at the very least though, let's give it a little bit of space. So style margin equals 20px. Okay, now we have some spacing. So please enter your information, name, phone, email, submit. So what we're going to do is we want when someone clicks submit input. So submit input upon click. We're going to do a function. And then within that function, we want to get the variables. So variable name equals, remember this is similar to what we did last lecture, name input. And we'll do the same with phone and email. I'm going to do multiple cursors, Command or Control D, change that to phone. Same thing here, change that to email. So now we have our variables. Now we're going to create a profile variable that's going to be a dictionary, or sorry, an object. So name equals name. So that's our variable that we created up there. Phone equals phone. And then email email. Cool. There's one thing I screwed up, which is, remember, we need to do our val. Actually, let's just see what happens. Okay. I can see that there's an error because I have my inspect. So unexpected curly bracket at line 64. And let's try to figure out the reason. Can anyone see the reason why they're giving this error of this curly bracket right here? I'll give you the hint. The error is on line 64.
Does she need the equal?
Yes. Okay. So that should solve the error. And also, I want to highlight one thing. This is just sort of where visual code can help you. So you notice that these are sort of darkened, name, phone, email. Usually you expect darkened to mean you've created a variable and it's not being used anywhere. So like, well, why did you create that if you're not going to use it? So they kind of are assuming that you screwed up somewhere. And that was a little bit confusing because I could see that I'm actually using them here in the creation of my profile object. So notice that when I put the equal sign back in, these light up. Cool. Now I can see profile is dark because I'm not using that anywhere. So how about I just do a console log profile just to sort of see what that ends up being. Okay, so reload, no more errors. We're good to go. My name is Will. My phone number is 202-253-7251. My email is wrosh@kgi.edu. Click submit. Boom. All right, so I printed out profile, but they're weird, right? It's not actually giving me the content. It's giving me like this whole object, right? So it's actually giving me the whole input with the ID email input. Reason is because I didn't actually ask for the value. I just asked for the element itself. I'm going to put the values in. And now I should get something more to my liking. There we go. Cool. So now we have a profile object that has my information. So now what I'd like to do is let's set my cookies here. So I'm not going to actually set my cookie until I submit a profile name. And we're going to call the cookie profile. And the content of the cookie will be the profile object that we just created. So now we can say profile equals cookies get profile, and then welcome text. We're going to insert welcome profile name. This actually needs to be a string. So now it's going to say welcome my name based on the profile object that I created. So let's just comment this code. I want to say when a user clicks, or sorry, submits the profile creation form, set a cookie. And then we'll comment here if there is a cookie show welcome message. We actually want to then say if profile then we do this code. Okay, so it won't do this welcome if there is no profile from the cookies. Okay, one last thing I want to do, if there's the profile, I actually want to hide this whole input thing. Where is it? It's in the index. So let's give this an ID called new user input. And now we're going to hide it if they've already done it. Okay. Now, this is kind of the, I guess, annoying thing about cookies is that we can't test it on our local. So we just have to kind of push it live and hope that everything was coded right. At the very least, what we can do is we can see if there's any errors. Looks like there's not, but it's not going to work on my local computer, unfortunately. All right, so printed it. So the JavaScript is working fine, but it's not setting the cookie. Okay, but it is what it is. You know what? I'd like to actually reload the page when they click submit as well. That way it gives the cookie time to be set and then retrieved. So how to reload page with JavaScript. W3 schools. I really decided if I get a W3 schools link, I always like to go with that just because of the way that they have like to try it yourself and all that. So we got lucky. We got it for that question. So we'll just put after we set the cookie, reload. Okay, so let's comment even better. So set profile info from inputs. Create profile cookie. Reload page so that cookie can take. If there's cookie, show welcome message. Hide new user input form. Show welcome. All right. Now, having these comments is always really nice. Like you may not need it for yourself, although you probably will if you take a break from coding for a couple of days and then forget everything that you just did. But it's definitely super important for your teammates to understand what's going on. Okay, let's go ahead and add that. Adding cookie-based profile page, or let's say profile entry, and then push. And now just to sort of square the circle, let's make this look a little bit nicer while we're waiting for it to take effect. So I think if I make this an H3, it should be a little smaller. Okay, so now the font size is a little bit more consistent with what's going on up there. I'm going to do margins is 20 up and on the top and bottom, but 0 on the left and right. So if we only do 2 inputs to margin, the first is top and bottom, second is left and right. Now I reload, it looks like that. Why don't we just put a border around it? 1 pixel, solid black. And then how about we give it a background color of well, bisque. Okay, and then how about a border radius? That's going to round the corners of 4 pixels. I don't know why I keep misspelling border. Okay. All right, so now it looks like more of a form. Maybe I want to add some padding so that it's not so tight right here. So how about padding is, I don't know, 12 pixels. Okay, that looks a little nicer, right? But let's check how GitHub looks. Okay, so I'm a new user, right? No cookie has been set, so it's not hiding the new user input. But now let's put something in. So Will Rosh, phone number, email, submit. Now it says welcome, undefined. Okay, so there is an error. I wonder why. So what we can do is we can try this cookies get profile within our debugger. So it gives us this object. Now, one clue is that it's within these straight brackets. So what happens if I just tell it to give me the first element? Okay, so it's a string. That's interesting. So what I'm gathering here actually is that the cookies is failing to load a full object, right? So I might actually have to separate it out into its components. So instead of having one cookie set for profile, I might need to actually have a cookie set name, cookie set phone, and then cookie set email. So I might just have to separate it out. So in this case, instead of saying if profile, we're actually going to say name equals cookies get name, and then if name, then it's going to use that. Now, for some reason, it's giving me this error, which is always a little bit worrisome. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a different name. So I'm going to give it this username. Yeah, sometimes when you set something like name, JavaScript gets confused because that's just such a generic word. They might be using that as a function somewhere as well. So just something to be careful of. Always pay attention to where Visual Studio Code is trying to help you out. Okay, so I think this is going to work now. You can make it look nicer too. Okay, so breaking apart profile cookie into its components. So you can see here how you might use your console to debug a little bit of what's going on with your code. But this, again, this is the most annoying part about working with cookies is that you can't test it on local. So you really have to get it right on GitHub, which requires pushing your code. And it just makes the process a little bit slower. But you'll see that it can be a very powerful tool once it's going. Okay, so you can see that my change went through, but it still might take a little bit of time to take effect. Okay, in the meantime, though, just some next steps. A few things you could use your cookies for. You could use it to track user preferences, to personalize your page. Maybe you could show a user specifying that they are a provider versus a patient, and maybe the page shows up a little bit differently. I know one page wanted to be able to know whether someone was a provider, in which case they would be able to see images, but otherwise the images would just be blurred. or some way obstructed. So that's a way that you could use cookies. You could also use it to track recently viewed content or to keep a logged in user actually logged in. So next step is going to be teamwork, and then we'll take our break, and then we'll do some more live coding sort of based on the feedback that you give me in teamwork. Let's see. Okay, so my code still has not set anything. It might be actually because maybe the code actually did take effect, but we already have cookies name. So let me see if I can just delete my cookies. So cookies.js, it's right here. So we can do cookies remove. Maybe cookies remove profile. And then let's see if we do cookies get. Now it's undefined. Okay, so now it's back, right? Gosh. 5387251. Okay, so it looks like it kind of worked, but cookie's name is undefined. And my thinking is that the reason is because we just should have never used name in the first place. So instead, what we want to just say is username. Then phone and email should be fine. Let's not even create the profile. Cookie set username is okay. And now we should be good. So I'll go ahead and push that live. Oops. So removing profile and changing name to username. And then push. Okay, so that's a good lesson that sometimes if your variables are too generic, there might be conflicts. Name is a very commonly used concept in coding. So that's not really a good name for a variable. Phone and email, those are weird enough that those shouldn't cause conflicts. But by changing username or name to username, that should fix my problem. Okay, I'm actually going to have to also change that. So, oops. Okay, so I'm going to create the breakout teams, and then we all can get started on that part. And then I'll just sort of gauge what would be most helpful for me to go over. Go ahead and join the rooms. Oh, I haven't opened them yet. Almost created them all. Okay, I've opened up the rooms. Go ahead and join them, and then I'll come visit you all as we go.
Hi, will do you mind if I have a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to ask before I heading to my group. Or wait, I'm sorry. Or maybe you can just come into the group because maybe other have the same question as well.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'll join your group.
Yeah, I'll raise my hand in that. Thank you. Stop with the CSS for my part. So
Mm.
Hello,
Hi, Will.
how's it going?
I think it's going very well. Here we can show you our. So this is kind of like where we're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking of adding, or so sorry. Wait, I can show you the next page. Yeah, and then we have like basically all of our questions mapped out.
Okay,
We just need to add the JavaScript to do that hide and show thing.
sure.
And I was thinking of adding like a progress bar somewhere at the top. So for like the data visualization, so they could see like how many more questions, I guess.
Yeah,
they need to
absolutely.
run. And then the next is like the animal matching slide.
Mhm.
So we're just waiting on like the JavaScript to help hide and show these things as well. And then on the last page, we have like a contact section where they could like send communications to their doctor and being able to like choose who to send it to and like for what reason. But I think Lynn was saying that she was asking you for help on the CSS part.
Sure.
so
Lynn.
yeah, so Janet, can you change the ending into matching?
This one?
That's your part, but then can you change matching and then adding a number 2 at the end?
You have a different matching?
Yeah, I'll create another one because at first Kevin said that like we put like a picture and then choose a picture instead of like putting the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if in the directory, can you do /io/matching2 and then enter? Yes. So will I have trouble with this because I don't know why I have like a background of the lion like and then the rest of the
Oh,
three
yeah.
picture that I want
see.
to add. And I believe that's from CSS because I tried to check with my HTML and then it's good to go.
Okay. So one good way to troubleshoot this might be to right click and do the inspect. And so now you can get an idea. Another thing is maybe on the upper left of inspect, you can see the mobile toggle. It's highlighted in blue. Yeah, make that a little bit bigger. Okay, but you can see it's the same problem, right? So now if you highlight over each element in the elements tag on the right, you can see what's what. Okay, so you know it's within body. Okay, you know it's not there. So keep going down. Okay, so it's within this form most likely somewhere. But let's do the other forms too, just see if they highlight it as well. Okay, so you know it's within that form. Okay.
Other form also have the same problem with like underneath
Yeah.
image.
Okay, so let's see. Let's highlight over each of those inputs. Okay, keep going. Okay, keep going. Okay, keep going. Okay, so I think what I'm seeing here is it looks to me like, so you're using these images, right? This bird and this lion. And then it's looking to me
Yeah.
like you're also using lion as the background image for the whole thing. So what I'm focusing in on is what you're highlighting right now.
Yeah,
This
this
selector
selector.
lion.
Yeah.
What happens if you right click and edit? Yeah, that's good. And then erase the lion part. Okay. And then
Do selector with the dash thing. Yeah. That's how I put
Yeah.
on the CSS. But
okay. There it is. So it's
Okay.
gone. So I think that was probably your problem.
but why though? I just don't get it. So I'm like,
Well, so my guess, just by looking at your code, is that you define the images under the ID of bird and lion and dog, right?
mhm.
So if you've defined lion as this image, then and then you write lion on the whole thing within the div, then it's going to think, okay, I want that whole div to also be a lion. So ways to solve that might be to maybe make that ID a little bit more detailed, like lion hyphen image or something like that. And then that way, you know that wherever you put that, it's going to be that lion image. So you essentially were repeating the lion ID within the input as well as within the div itself.
And okay, and I also want quick question. So because I tried to get the select, but like the select radio type buttons on the left hand side, same thing with the bird thing. But then for the other image, it's like just shift to the right side, as you can see right now.
Yeah, that one, I'm not quite sure why, but you could play around with, so
Is it have anything to do with the background sizing? Like,
what I'm thinking is that you have, so you've actually styled the, let's see, let's look at the CSS. Can you show me the CSS?
Can I do it from here, Will, or do I have to open up?
You
the-
can, but honestly, it might be better to look at the code for that part.
Okay.
can you see my screen?
Not yet. Okay,
How
now I
about
can
now?
see it. Yes. Okay. So essentially, your class for cat, dog, giraffe, lion are what you have as your image. Okay. So now, if we go back to the HTML, wherever that is, that you have the selector. So where's the, yeah, okay. Okay, so we have these inputs, right? With your class is essentially your label. Okay. So this is something where you might just have to play around with different ways to style it. You might
Does
want
it
to.
have to do with my style margin right here? That's why I was like thinking.
It
but-
might. I mean, honestly, one thing that I know is typically the case is that usually with radio buttons, the label is on the left of the button, and so maybe just Googling how do I put my label on the right of the button. My guess is that positioning is always the weirdest part with web design. it might be something along the lines of there's a term called float, or an attribute within CSS called float. So maybe you would have your image float right, and then that might force it to go to the right of the button, but that might also have other problems.
No, but what I mean is that for the bird, the button is on the left side, and then for the rest of the image, even though the button is on the left side, the image is stripping down, not next to the button. So I was wondering, like, why is that?
You could try maybe putting, because sometimes there's problems when you have inputs that are all right next to each other. So one thing you could try would be maybe to put each input within a div so that they're sort of isolated. So usually that helps. So the hint that I get that makes me suggest that is that the first item is good, but then the others are not. So the number one would be, is there anything different about that first item? I'm guessing there isn't. And then if there isn't, then maybe try just separating them into their own little bubbles, right? And you might be able to use a div parent element to do that within each
Okay.
input.
Okay.
But these are good questions to have, right? These mean that you'll both clearly know how to code, right, at this point, and you're making a cool looking site, and now it's just the nitty gritty, right? And these are normal problems for even experienced developers to have.
I had a question. Well, when we
Sure.
do the user testing, do we have to like identify the users by name? Or
No.
like, okay,
Yeah, if they don't want to be identified, that's fine. I don't know who they are anyway,
Okay.
so it wouldn't really add anything. But really what I'm looking for is good notes, and
Okay.
then ideally incorporating those notes in some way, shape, or form,
okay.
right?
For the-
If you see like, hey, there's no notes worth incorporating from the user testing, it's probably a good sign that maybe the user testing didn't go too well.
Okay.
So like try to get something from the user testing that you can then incorporate into your prototype.
Okay. I knew you were commenting a lot on the JavaScript page. Do we need to just comment on like all of our HTMLs and CSS as well, or should we just stick to like the JavaScript?
Yeah, I think the JavaScript is the most important. I think sometimes it can help within your HTML to break it down, maybe between sections.
Okay.
Just because the HTML, especially if there's a lot on the page, it can look very messy and intimidating to a new person who's walking and looking at the code. So you're kind of making it easier for me to read, right? And I'm the proxy for someone who you might hire onto your team, who needs to be able to look at the code and say, okay, I get what they're doing. I can now be a productive team member.
Okay. If we find things like elements, say like a cool looking nav bar from CodePen, can we like copy that code in, or do we have to just like make it our own?
Well, you can definitely copy it
Okay.
in. The caveat that I give everyone is that you might run into more debugging than you would have if you just created it on your own. But I do it all the time because sometimes I see something where I'm like, I really like this. I don't know how to create it on my own. So I'm going to put that time in to copy their code and then try to make it work within my application.
Okay. One last question. Well, for like the data visualization part, do you have like any suggestions on how we could incorporate it? Because I know when I was doing the wireframe, one of my main things was like having a progress graph from like their previous test to this test. But since we don't have like a server to kind of like collaborate all the information into, how could we like?
I mean, it could be something as simple as the progress bar that you mentioned for like, what question are you within the quiz, as well as I would count data visualization as once you finish the quiz, hey, you're great, or call your doctor right now, that sort of thing. And using colors to show, because in your case, these are elderly people who are using it. And so it's pretty important that it just become very obvious to them what's going on. Okay. Anything else I can help answer?
Oh, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you all are on a good pace, so it's looking pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Hi, how are you all doing?
we'll just keep here. We can just ask.
Will,
Hello.
funny
Good, good.
you came in during our discussion about meeting with you.
How's it going? How's the webpage looking?
We're a little behind, but
Yeah.
let's see.
Um, we did like one user test,
Yeah,
and Tyler, if you want to.
yeah. I can't share screen, can I? Oh, I can't share screen.
I could go onto your page too.
Okay,
Is it
yeah.
live on GitHub?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. And is it the recoveryvr.git or is it a different
Yes.
link? Okay. Okay, so I see a nav bar and then sort of a woman in a wheelchair.
Yeah,
Okay,
I guess a
gotcha.
big placeholder picture.
Yes.
Not
Okay,
final.
cool. So I see you've got links that go to different HTML pages,
Mhm.
and then you just got to start filling in those pages, huh?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The goal for me for CSS right now is to fix up our sign-in page, make sure the nav bar just looks perfect and I guess uniform throughout.
Mhm.
That's what I'll be focusing on today.
And then what are you thinking about in terms of your main function that'll sort of demonstrate JavaScript and satisfying the user story?
Could you repeat that again? You kind of cut off.
Hmm?
Could you repeat that again? The audio
Yeah,
cut.
I was just wondering what are you all thinking in terms of your main function that you're going to create using JavaScript to satisfy the user story in some way?
Yeah, so I'm looking on like just the choose your own adventure type game. So it'll be like
Mhm.
inputs of the first thing will be just what kind of procedure have you had, and we'll just have like two options probably, and you can pick either one, and it'll send you to a different storyline. And
Mhm.
then if you pick an option, it'll lead you to something else. If you pick another option, it'll lead you to something else within the story. And then we probably do need to add like a on the community page like a forum or some type of chat feature as well.
Okay, great.
So that'll be
Yeah,
our
I think based on some of the feedback that I'm getting from the teams, I'll probably incorporate some sort of chat demos into the second half of the lecture. So maybe you can pull from that.
yeah.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Okay. Anything else that I can help with? Yeah, how about conceptually? Is there any, do you feel like you've got what it takes and maybe it's just a matter of putting in the time, or do you feel conceptually there might be some gaps?
I mean, I think maybe we like would be able to finish like everything, but like having more conceptual, like, oh, these are some functions that like are available, like the VR games,
Mm-hmm.
and just like more concept than like if it actually works.
Sure.
Yeah. But what did you want?
So I was
Okay.
gonna say I'm pretty good for concept, but we'll be working on it more like tomorrow and Wednesday. So we we're
Mhm.
wondering if we could set up a meeting with you on Wednesday after we sort of work on it a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. Just send me an email with a proposed time,
Okay.
and let me know.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Hey, how are y'all doing?
So we have
Good.
a small issue going on.
Sure.
So when I was working on the website, let me pull it up, figure out where it is. Give me one moment. I changed the name of the or I changed the index.html. I just changed that file name and now it's not showing up on our GitHub anymore.
Yeah, it looks for that as the home page. So you might have to just change that back to index.
So I did change it back and
Mhm.
it's still not pulling.
And is this as of like a day ago or just as of a few minutes ago? Because it might just take some time to reload.
I did this, I think, on Sunday or on
Okay.
Friday. I did this on Friday. So I can go ahead and change it right now and see what ends up happening. But as of right now, we got the login and the sign up page to work from the nav bar. We were discussing how to use JavaScript to blur out these potential images, either with like another like maybe like a gray box, and then we click like a button that removes the grayed out image. And that's pretty much where we're at so far with our progress.
Okay. One thing you might try, and if you got to do this, it's fine, right? Is let's go to your GitHub page.
Okay.
Okay, so it's apatel1026 at github.io. And what I'm seeing is that there is still no index.html. Oh, so here's the thing. It's not going to know where to go. It's going to look in what is called the home directory. So you're going to need to just pull your index.html out of this CSS and HTML file, which I assume that's where it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just pull that one out and put it into the home directory, and then it should work again.
You mean by the home directory, just have it like out here?
Yeah,
If I just create like a new file, will that work?
it will, but the file will be blank. It won't do anything. It's best to do it on your local computer. And just basically move the index out of that folder and
Well,
then push the changes onto GitHub, and then that should solve everything.
okay, let me make sure.
And for the nav bar, when he's referencing it, just change that back to index.html then for the homepage.
Yeah.
So this is what used to be the index.html. You're just saying to pull this like out here
Yep, basically.
and then just change it back to index.html.
And then that should solve all your problems.
Okay, and then I'll just
Well,
go
although
back
it's gonna
in.
create new problems.
Yeah, I'll go back in and change this to index.
Yeah, all your links, but also if you're gonna keep all of your links within the folder, you're basically gonna have to do your href is that CSS and HTML folder / index.html. Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
So right now your hrefs are just the file name. The only way that works is if the file is in the same directory as your index page, right? And so if you move your index page out of that CSS and HTML folder, now suddenly it's in a different directory. So all you'll have to do is do this like login, right? That's login.html. It'll have to change to CSS and HTML / login.html, because you're basically saying, hey, first go into this folder named CSS and HTML and then get the login.html file.
Okay. So it's just like pathing to like local files on your computer.
You're saying like this, how I wrote it right here?
Kind of, but it would be in your href within the quotes.
Okay, so you're saying move this in
Yeah.
front of the login.
Yeah, and you can test that part on your local computer. So you can just make sure that it works first.
Okay.
Let me leave you guys so that you can sort of get that going, and then I'll come back to you before it's all over just to make sure that it worked.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
We're doing well. I think we wanted to ask you about the map integration thing.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go through that after this. That's on my to-do list.
Okay.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, we were struggling on that.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I think that was like kind of our big question so far. I mean,
Okay.
we're working on. I do have a question.
Yes.
So like, it's more like how to code question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna share my screen real quick. So we have all these like screens and like kind of
Yes.
websites, and like we have a home screen where I have it here. I mean, it's not like complete, but like you have a home and you find like your insurance, and then you go to insurance company and you will
Mhm.
see like a table. But for the contact one, is it worth to do only one screen? Or like, is it too hard? Or like, my question is it worth it to do a complete website? Or should I just like do like a pop-up with the contact information?
I think, a pop-up would be nice because it would demonstrate a new skill. So that would be my vote for the pop-up. But either way works. But
Okay.
ultimately, I think what'll be most important is focusing on the features that help satisfy your user story, right? So kind of finding insurance companies near you, right?
Yeah, I think like for that is just like we need the map.
Yeah. And
Okay.
what you can do in the meantime would be, so you have the map, you could figure out ways to just assume that the map is maybe an image or something, and then lay it out the way that you would normally want it laid out for your web page. And then you can just kind of insert the map stuff in at the end, if that makes sense.
So like the map, it's kind of like an image that you just need like a source.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, got
That'd
it.
be one way to do it, right? And then if you want to put the real maps in, you can just do that once you've mastered that concept.
Okay.
But just so that it doesn't bottleneck you, you don't want to be waiting to do everything until you get the maps in. Instead, you can just sort of get this done first.
Okay, will
Cool.
do.
All right.
Thank
Anything
you.
else?
No.
All right.
There you go.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good. How are you?
How are you?
Good. How's it looking?
This is still a work in progress. I had a question, so
Mhm.
let me share this. So I was trying to do, what was it? So for this, like when I use the bootstrap grid, oh wait, you can't see that. No, let me, 1 second. Top share, reshare with the whole screen. Yeah, okay. Okay, so when I was trying to do the grid with Bootstrap, it was like saying that I need to include this container class. But every time I include a container class, I notice that it changes the background to blue, and I don't have this color anywhere in the CSS.
Yeah, that's weird. Does it mess everything up if you just don't have the container class?
I don't know, I can try. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's put that back in. Okay, and then where does it close? So you have the container class.
I think it closes at the very end.
Okay. So everything's within the container, and then it's blue. Have you tried just Googling bootstrap container class.
Because there was this other page that I was just like messing with as like a test page. And then even in this, it has a container class, and this is also blue, and I don't know why it's blue.
Hmm. Bootstrap container class. Okay, so which bootstrap are you using? The 3.4, right?
Yeah, that the one up here. Yeah, there should all be the 3.4 one.
4.1. I don't know why it's blue, but here's one thing you could do. Is this on your live page?
Not yet.
Okay,
No.
so let's go back to your browser and let's use the inspect to debug a little bit. Okay. And then within elements, you can start highlighting through your code on the right until you see something that highlights that whole thing. Okay, so that looks like a clue, which obviously
Yeah.
you kind of knew that, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, it looks like it is the container. Unless there's something in the CSS that I've missed. Yeah, because none of this said like, I don't see that color anywhere.
yeah, can I see your CSS in the code itself in the Visual Studio Code? Okay.
Or this one,
Yeah.
that's not part of this page. This page
Okay.
does. I didn't add any specific CSS because that's not my part. Yeah. So there is no CSS actually done. I just did the HTML for now.
Where's container? I see that you've defined container.
That was for container.
I think what you might be looking at is a conflict. So just do Control F within here for container.
What is that?
There
Oh,
we
maybe
go.
that's why.
So this is your problem, right? You can see
Oh,
that.
got it. Okay, yeah.
So what I would recommend, container. So this was like the problem that I ran into, right? A few minutes ago in lecture was I tried to define a variable as name, but name is used by sort of basic functions of JavaScript. So I think you got the same problem where you've defined this CSS element called container, but container is also being used by Bootstrap. So I would recommend renaming this CSS class something else. So like chat container or chat hyphen container, something like that.
Okay.
And then also, of course, rename the references to it to match. And then that way you're freeing up the Bootstrap container element to be itself, so to speak.
Okay.
Right?
I'll just, instead of editing this one, because this is not mine, this is like Kristen's, I'll just make a new one that says like about us container or something.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, I was so confused. I was like, why is everything blue? I didn't put anything in anywhere. Thank you.
Now, another thing you might be able to do is maybe the container is actually useful for holding your page together, right? Because you sort of built everything within that container. So what you could do is you could also copy the contents of
This
container. Yeah. And then name that your own thing, right? You could call it Kavia's container. And then just change the things that you don't like, right? Maybe take away the background color, that sort of thing, right? The height is also kind of a problem, right? Because it's got a height, but the height is shorter than your page. So you could sort of co-opt that code, make it your own within that other page, and just make sure you name it something different.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, classic error of conflicting naming conventions, which happens all the time. It's a good thing that you guys ran into it, because that's something that, even experienced coders run into.
Got it. Okay.
And now you know how to solve it, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Any
Okay,
other
and
questions?
then, I was wondering if there was like a rubric or something for the final presentation.
Yeah, I've had a couple questions on that, so I'll try to put something together. I mean, I've had in the slides an example of what that looks like, and I think I also have it in the syllabus, but I'll try to I'll do an announcement that just gets really into the nitty gritty, and that reflects some of the questions that have come my way.
Okay, thank you. Because I was wondering like how, I guess, like complex you want the page to be, because I don't know if I can like figure out the like cookies and everything for logins.
Yeah, no worries.
I can try, but yeah.
Like, I want you to focus on what's important for your user story. So some examples, they're going to really need cookies to make their page work right. You all might not. And that's okay. You don't have to use every concept. I just want to see that you're using the right concepts for your particular user story.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Thanks for that.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
We're good. We spent the day going over preliminary user test.
Mm-hmm.
So front end and the back end have a different idea. Like we have I can pull up the website just on here. So we have the login, and Leilani got the dummy working.
Cool.
Leilani. I need the password because I can't type. It's Sunny what? Okay, 1, 2, 3, X. And so right now we have it going directly to the recipe generator, which is our main excitement feature.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the back end perspective is that's like we're guiding you towards that. But from the front end, the way that I had envisioned it is you would go right back to the homepage after logging in. So we want to do a very quick user test where we're just testing out this one you sign in and you redirect here. This isn't working right now, so we'll explain what it does and promise that it's going to be pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And then ask them, would they prefer being directed back to the original homepage, where now they have access to like these buttons here, or would now be active, versus in the original one before you log in. These aren't there. It's not like set up just yet. It's a little wonky right now, but the idea was you have a public homepage where these two key features are you get prompted to an information page about it. Please log in or sign up, make an account to use these features. So it's really when they sign in, do the users prefer to be directed to our main excitement feature or back into the homepage and have the option of choosing anything they want from the main page?
And that's the perfect type of question to answer through user testing.
Yeah, so instead of like Leilani and I going back and forth and maybe getting in a heated discussion about it, we're just like, let the people choose.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're focusing on this half of the week. I'm going to help Julie with it because she has Team Masters project stuff. She designed the whole user test. I'm just proctoring the first part because I have time. And then Leilani's planning on working on making this functional.
Great.
In the meantime, and we're purposely not going to, she's purposely said she's not going to push right now until after that user testing is, because I'm going to give them the link and ask them to go directly to our site and talk them through it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna we don't want to generate the code in front of our users. We want to be a little more professional than that.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
I think you're on a good pace, and I think once you get those things done, and I like that you're using the user feedback to pick a certain direction. That makes a lot of sense. I think you'll be in good shape.
And Julie, did you want to show Will the main big user test?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Give me 1 second.
Also, Will, is that
Mhm.
okay if I can set like office hours on Thursday? I know that's not.
There's office hours on Thursdays.
Oh, is it? But can I do it earlier? Because I have a lab during.
Yeah, just send me an email with a proposed time, and then I'll or ideally times plural. Then I can pick a time that works for me. It works for both of us.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, so this is basically a testing script that I added to. It's pretty general. It's just explaining the project on a very high level. And then also kind of explain what they would be doing without, sort of telling them what to do. Since we are trying to go for a more concurrent think aloud, where we want to get their sort of organic reactions and first impressions. I've added a couple of actions that we're interested in. And then I'm currently setting up times with people to sort of get that user test in. And then we have a timeline of being able to finish this by Friday and get the feedback to our coders by then. And then over the weekend, we'll be doing some major user work where we'll be getting the final presentation done and all that. But that's where we are in terms of like timeline and sort of where the user test is at.
Great. Well, I like the way that you all are progressing. I think you're on a good pace. As long as you're able to close out strong, I think you'll be looking good for this project. All right. We'll probably close out in maybe a minute or two.
Aesthetic thing.
Mm-hmm.
So our main feature is the recipe generator. And right now we have a dummy chat of what it would look like if you were posting.
Mm-hmm.
Time, we don't have a lot of time. So that's why in the lecture, I was asking how many functions do we have to have right now? It's the sign in and all of the active buttons, opening up new pages that we have, and the recipe generator. Is it fine to leave the message board just as a dummy showing them what this will be?
I think, if you do really well on the other aspects of the platform, I think that's okay. I will be showing an example of what a message board might look like too, and maybe you'll be able to adapt some of that. But I think it's sort of, I look at it as a totality, how are you satisfying the user story? Are you showing mastery of the different concepts? And, so far, I think you all are looking good, as long as you close out on sort of what you were talking about.
I just wanted to confirm that, like, if we don't get to that extra excitement feature, can we just show you what we aim to do in the future?
Yep, understood.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah, that portion
Okay.
is
How's it
the
working
nav-
now?
That portion is the nav bar, but I'm not sure why it only works from. So right now we changed it and it reloaded the page, but now for some reason from the home page you can get to the login and the sign up, but once you get to login and the sign up, you can't go back to the home page.
Yeah. So these will work like when you first get onto the site, homepage just refreshes, login will bring it up, but then when you try to go back, it's.
So let's go back again. So back one more time. Okay, so this login link works, right?
Yeah, as well as the sign up.
And it's in the sign up, it's going to signup.html. And now let's go back to the broken link. these ones, okay? So look at what it's doing here. It's if you look at the link, it's going CSS and HTML slash CSS and HTML slash login. Right. And the reason it's doing that is because you're already within that folder.
Oh, okay.
So you just need to fix that. Honestly, if I were in your shoes, I'd probably just get rid of that folder. Because it's causing more trouble than it's probably worth. And then it's going to be difficult, I think, to refer to like your CSS and your JavaScript once you're already within that folder. So I would just put all of your HTML files in your root directory, they call it, which is basically, where you put the index.html. And that should solve the bulk of your issues.
Is it okay to
Go ahead.
go ahead? Is it okay to keep the CSS folders in there? Since we're just
Yeah, the CSS, it's good to have those in another folder, because if your HTML files are all within the root directory, the main directory, then you always know that all they have to do to reference the CSS is do the whatever that folder is / the CSS file name.
I had a question. So,
Mhm.
if we want to link the home, the login, and the sign up to a single CSS file, are we able to do that? Or do we have to have an individual CSS file for every HTML file?
Oh yeah, they could all link to the same CSS file. That's perfectly legitimate. The only thing that you'll want to be careful with is if there's conflicts, right? Maybe you've already created a title CSS thing and you want your title to look different on one page versus another. You'll just have to name them slightly different things, right? Maybe you have your sign up title versus your login title. I imagine in your case you want them to be the same, but just as an example, if
Yeah, I
you
was just
reference
trying
one
to
folder.
so I was trying to keep the nav bar the same on all 3 pages
Mhm.
that I had styled, but for some reason it wasn't working. But it might have just been because we were going back and forth between the folders. So that's probably the main issue, to be honest.
Yeah, that's your step number 1, resolve that. And then yeah, maybe putting everything into one CSS would help too.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna close it out, and then we'll take our break and then get started on some of the live coding. Okay, let's get started again. As we're waiting for everyone to trickle back in, though, I just wanted to close the loop on the login form that we use cookies for. So now that we've fixed the naming and all of that, you can see that this shows up before I've done anything. And then if I put my name, phone number, and my email and click submit, it reloads the page and it says now welcome Will Rosh. And if I go somewhere else, maybe I go to tables and then I go back, this is still here because it saved the cookie in my browser. If I were to clear my cookies in the console, so cookies remove, if I don't put anything in there, it'll just remove all cookies. Maybe I have to do the name. So username, profile too. Now it comes back, right? So now I'm a new user again because I've removed the cookies. Okay. So that's that. I did get some questions about the maps. So why don't we go through that right now? I actually find this this thing that we put in last week a little bit annoying. So I'm going to take away this display none and make it so that we don't have to click this show menu button for it to show up. This is actually GitHub, so I do need to go back to my local one. Okay, so now they show up no matter what. Let's do maps. So you can see no maps exists right now. So I'm going to have to create a maps.html. I'm just going to go ahead and save my index as maps.html. Just save me some time. I'm going to delete all this stuff. We're going to call this ALS414 maps. Reload. It's not there. Okay, so maps.html. We have maps.html. So this should work now. There we go. ALS414 maps. Okay, so how do we get maps in? Let's search Google Maps JavaScript API. Click here. They just give you an overview of how it all works. And then they have this example of what you need to do to make your maps work properly. So I'm just going to add this CSS to my CSS. Okay. Comment Google Maps CSS. Okay. And then I'm going to take their JavaScript and put this in my JavaScript. Google Maps JS. Okay. And their HTML, really the most important thing is, well, two things. One is the map. So I put this wherever I want my map. In this case, I'm just going to put it below my title. And then I need to include this script. We'll just put that. Not sure if it needs to go above or below, but we'll find out. So I don't use the defer. The reason they have the defer there is just, it's basically saying, hey, load the page first until we've loaded the Google Maps stuff. You can do that, but I'm just trying to take variables out, things that could possibly go wrong. And that's one of them. So I don't want that there. But you could probably make it work with it there. So now I reload and voila, I've got a map. Cool. I could now even put some styling on my map. So if I want, how about a border? We'll do 2 pixels, solid, black, maybe a border radius, 4 pixels. And then how about a width? Let's set our width at maybe 400 pixels. And then how about our height? We do the same. All right, now I've got a map. I could even put a title above it. Oops. I don't know how that happened. Okay, so we're going to put our title, about H3, where we live. Cool. Maybe even if I wanted, put some shadows. So box shadow. Now you see it says it attaches 1 or more drop shadows to the box. You could either use 2 values or 4. Let's just do 4. How about we just do 2 pixels across the board? There. Now we have a map with a shadow. Just to add a little color, you can just play around with these. Are sort of dials that you can play around with them to see what they do. But if I change all those except for the 1 to 1 pixel, you just see it made the shadow a little bit smaller, right? I think I can also specify color right here. There, now it's a gray shadow, right? So just a little tidbit that you could pick up. So we don't live in Sydney, right? So how do we change that? A couple things. We can zoom. If we do zoom to 1, then it's like the whole world. I think the max is 20, which is like individual buildings. This is obviously way too zoomed. But if I zoom out, now I can suddenly see a little bit more. Let's change the latitude and longitude to align with, how about Claremont? I want California coordinates. I get them here. So 34 north. So Australia is south, so that's negative. North is positive. So I'm going to turn this from negative 34.397 to positive. What I got from Google. Longitude is now 117. Don't remember if west is negative or positive, but we're about to find out. Reload the page, and we are where? Let's not zoom in so much. 14. Okay, we're somewhere in Asia. So I'm guessing that this needs to be negative for west. There we go, Claremont, right? So now define my map to show an area. Now I got a map, a real map. You can drag, drop, add pins, things like that. If you're interested in more about how to do maps, just read more of the example. You can format the map, make it look different colors and all that. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with the map once you've got it working. Okay. Any questions about maps? Yes, Maria.
Yeah, so for example, our map, like we need to find like a specific location. So we will have like an input, for example, a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna put on the input, I don't know, Guava Grill.
Yeah.
And we need to see it on the map. Like, do we make that connection on the HTML?
You know, that might be something to read more into the map documentation. I think you cannot easily just search a map name. However, what you could do is maybe have a couple pre-made maps that you've created through here. And then have, based on what you search, a different one show up. So we learned yesterday that how we can use, or last week, how we can use JavaScript to show certain elements, right?
Okay,
So
yeah.
you can imagine maybe something where I put this, oops, I put this within a div and I call the ID Claremont, something like that, right? Okay, and then we can maybe have it hidden. Display is none. Now it's hidden, and then, you know, I could have a button on the maps. Maybe several buttons. Oops, keep doing that. ID equals show Claremont. And then within my JavaScript, I could say, you know, show Claremont, click, and then we do, if we click that, then Claremont, okay, forgot the hashtag here. So now, there, And then we could just do that for several different buttons and several different maps and have it work that way, right? So that's a little bit of sort of Wizard of Oz, right? Where it's a lot more manual than you would hope to be down the road, but it works for the purposes of the prototype demonstration. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So that's with maps. Why don't I just create a back button, href index.html. Back. Oh, going back to index, right? Let's do chat. So there's no chat. Let's create one. So I'm just going to save my maps, but I'm going to save it under a different name called chat. And then I'm going to delete the maps part. And then call it ALS414 chat. Okay, so that didn't work, I think, because my link actually doesn't work yet. So let's go back to index. Yeah, so it's going to placeholder. So we want it to go to chat.html. Chat. All right, ALS414 chat. So, oh yeah, one last thing before I get through it, or get past it with the maps. You notice that there's this API key. I would highly encourage you to, within that Google page, if you just Google Maps JavaScript API, within here, be careful with this ad. This is clearly not Google. It tells you how to create your own API key. I would highly recommend that you create your own API key. However, if you want to use mine, that's fine. It's just, you could go to my GitHub and then steal it from my code, and that'll work. Okay. The main reason is because if you're using it with millions of users, they want to start making you pay for that. But for your purposes, your traffic will be so low that it won't matter. Same goes for what I'm going to show you next, which would be the Facebook comments plugin. So just Google Facebook comments plugin. First thing that pops up, they tell you how to use it. So I'm going to say the URL that we want to comment on. In my case, I want it to be this wrosh.github.io. Okay, so I put that in. And I hit enter, get code, and now it just gives me the code that I need to put in. So I'm gonna copy this, and it says put this right after the opening body tag. So go into chat, put it right after the opening body tag, get my indents to look good. Okay. And then I put this code wherever I want it to appear. So how about we put it underneath the back button? Let's see if this works. This might not work because I'm actually trying this on my local computer rather than on the wrosh.github.io, but let's find out. Might work. Okay, so it doesn't work. Let's try pushing the code and see if it works. Oh, but here's the other thing. We're going to need to actually use the chat button or the chat page, right? So let's create code for this. Okay, so this data href, I'm just going to change it to this, but for chat.html. Because that's the page that I'm trying to put the chat on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and push these live. Implementing chat and maps. Okay. So while we're waiting for that, I'll just explain this a little bit. So this is probably the most important part of the Facebook comments plugin. They need to know what page you are actually commenting on. And that's important because it enables everything to kind of be reconciled, where if I have a comments feature, you can imagine where most people use it is on like a blog or a web page with articles that they want to implement commenting on. You don't want to confuse it, where someone makes a comment on the political article, someone else makes a comment on the sports article. You don't want them to be mixed. So this helps Facebook understand what the page is that you're creating their comments plugin for. Okay. I'm just going to go directly to the page. Oh, there it is. So it worked. I'll write a comment. Testing for ALS414. Post. You can see that I can like it. Can reply it. Are you sure? And it just sort of creates the whole sequence, right, of a chatbot. Okay. So that's all of the Facebook things. Now, maybe you don't want it to all be Facebook. You don't want people to have to log into Facebook to make it work. If that's the case, we can do it manually. And I'll show this to you because I think this is also a good way to just see in general another feature of JavaScript. What I'll do is I'll create a div with the style of, let's make it sort of big. So width is 400 pixels, height also 400 pixels. Let's give it a border. Border is 1 pixel, solid black. That should be good. And close out the quotes. Let's go back to my local page. All right. So now I have kind of a chat screen. Let's also give it a margin. 12 pixels. So now it's distanced from the back button. Below or with, yeah, below this, an input type is text. And then let's give it an ID called chat message. And then next to that, let's create another input type submit. An ID would be send message. Okay, so now I kind of have like a chat screen, right? Now let's test out how we want this to look, right? So what I'll do is I'll just create a, how about a P element? And then maybe give it a background color of, how about aquamarine? And then let's see how that looks. And then we'll just do a test message, right? Test message. See how that looks. Okay. Looks okay. Not quite what I want it to be yet. Let's give it a border. 1 pixel, solid black. Give it a margin. Maybe a little bit smaller margin, 6 pixels. Okay, now it's starting to look a little bit more like a message. Let's also give it a little bit of padding. Just a little tiny bit, 3 pixels. Okay. So now it kind of looks like an actual message. Before we move forward, let's put these all into a class so that it's less ugly. Okay. So we're going to call the div style maybe chat box. Okay. Yes. So chat box is going to have all this information. Okay. And then let's call these chat messages. Same thing. Okay, you can see that everything kept its formatting. So that worked. And now what we'll do is we'll create a little bit of JavaScript to create these. Okay, so that looks good. Let's go to scripts. Chat box JavaScript. Okay. So I'm just gonna clear my windows a little bit. So what I want is when someone hits the send message submit button, send message on click function, we want it to see what was in the input. So our input box was this one, chat message. Okay. We want the value, and we're going to put that into a variable that we'll define as message. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually append the message to the chat box. But first we have to kind of transform this. So we're going to create message HTML, and that's going to equal, we want it to look like this thing that we've just created. That in quotes, and then just change test message, similar to how we've done in our previous examples, to the variable. Okay. Then we simply append it to chat box. Chat box is actually a class, not an ID. See? So instead of using the hash, I use the dot. Append message HTML. Okay. Let's see if that works. That was a lot of coding without testing, so it may not have worked, but let's check it out. All right, already we have a problem. Uncaught syntax error at JavaScript line 101. So right here, it's saying there's a syntax error. Unexpected string. So can anyone see what my problem is here? Why am I getting an error at line 101?
Do you need a hashtag?
I think I had a typo. It's this thing. So this squiggly kind of helps me. Right. So I actually put an underscore instead of a space. Simple error just from typing too fast. Now it should be good. Okay, don't worry about this map thing. Okay, so testing 1, 2, 3. All right, there we go. Responders. Cool. So this is within the context of a chat, but you could use your imagination to figure out how you all might use that for your own examples. I think, some of you have areas where you want to have an input and have that add something to your page. And this would be a good way to do that. Okay, so 5:20, that concludes the lecture. As usual, I'll stick around till everyone leaves and answer any questions that might remain. I will push this code live so that you all can reference it as you're working on your prototypes. I'm here for office hours. If you need a time outside of office hours, just send me an email, ideally with a selection of times, and then I can let you know what works for me. I'll also send an announcement explaining in more detail about how the grading will happen with the final project.